So I just watched Ari's new special. It's called American Sweetheart. It's on Netflix. I liked it. It was good. He had an interesting background setup that I haven't quite seen in a comedy special, so I appreciated that. It gave it a certain kind of vibe. Went along with the theme of the special. Thought it was super well structured. Ari's obviously a really good writer, and I really like the way he sort of set up a lot of his stories and stuff in a way that kept coming back around, and it felt loose and irreverent but also clever, and so I like that about it. I feel like Ari occupies kind of an interesting space in the comedy world. We've talked about how he's had his weird escapades, his whole thing with Kobe Bryant that everybody got mad at him about when Kobe Bryant died, and he shit on Kobe. And then there was recently this thing where he took a shit on stage for some reason, and other just weird things that have sort of emanated from the comedy podcast world involving Ari. So he's kind of a weird dude, a strange dude, but he's also a staple. He just always pops up in comedy. He's always there. And he always has pretty good material. He's good for a laugh for sure. He is funny, and just kind of an interesting character. There's something sort of I don't know. There's something charismatic in a weird way about him with his dryness, and so I think there's something compelling about him, even though he's a little weird. He describes himself in this special as the least successful out of all of his friends, which is a funny way to put it. I never would have thought of that. I didn't necessarily know that that's true, but that makes sense. And I like the fact that he's just sort of in that echelon of comics that makes a living doing comedy, lives in that world, and he isn't a super famous show business guy. I guess he's had a show or two. He had that Comedy Central show, which they ended up taking from him and doing without him. This Is Not Happening. And so, he just kind of is a comic. And I do kind of have respect for people that really just exemplify what they do and just live that life, and they make the living that comes with it and really dedicate themselves to the craft. That's what I like about comedy. That's what makes me interested in comedy, is I'm interested in characters like that, because while you have all these different personality types that might do or try comedy, the ones who are going to really succeed are going to be the ones who are really dedicated to that craft and to the grind of continuing to try jokes in front of people. And so that's different from what I do as a music artist, rapper, and now podcaster, I guess. It's different, but I respect it, and that's the kind of thing that motivates me. So I see that in Ari Shaffir. I see that not only does he sort of seem to live on his own terms, but he kind of shows that grind. He put out a really good special whenever that was, a year or two ago, maybe longer. And then now he comes with this other one, and it's good, he's putting out good work. He's not necessarily a super widely known comic who's super hot right now, but he's doing good stuff. He's probably in his prime or near his prime, who knows. But yeah, I don't know. I have some thoughts on this special, not too much. He's not a guy that I judge politically super hard. But he had one thing. I'll try to make this relatively short here, but he did have one thing that he said that kind of exemplified a larger ethic to me, because you got to be careful with these comedy specials trying to judge people's actual worldview based on their comedy material. You can't necessarily do that, because it's jokes. They're going, as much effort goes into the writing of this shit, it's what they're going for is the joke. They're trying to make it funny. So that is the number one thing that motivates what they're writing. So you can't necessarily judge them as a person or their worldview based on that. But I do think it's kind of a reflection of their worldview. You can see hints of their worldview in the things that they sort of take for granted in their jokes and that sort of thing. And so he has this part later on in the special where he's talking about, words that people can't say anymore. Because, he's the first comedian in the world to talk about that. And he talks about how the N-word and the F-slur are like, off limits. And those are bad words and they should be gone. They should be arrested, get them out of here. But then he talks about the word retarded. And he said that one is like, we shouldn't have let him take that one. We should have said something. We should have stood up and not allowed that to happen. And he goes kind of hard on mentally challenged people in this special. Like he definitely like goes hard on that whole angle. And it's not like motivated particularly, just very, very callous. But like I would say that is where he went the hardest in this particular special. Not exactly sure why, but his whole premise there with like we should have said something when they came for it was like kind of a reference to the old Holocaust adage of like first they came for the socialists and I said nothing, sort of referencing that. He's not directly referencing it, but that was kind of the vibe of it. And that was just funny to me because it is a funny joke. It's not a good take, but it's a funny joke. But it's interesting to me that for a comic to express that sentiment, about something that is so petty, because it's funny to express it about something petty like that, but it makes me wonder why we don't get that type of energy from comedians in different places, that understanding of first they came for such and such, I said nothing. That paired with like this super sardonic, and admittedly in this special he admits that he's just an apathetic person, and a lot of people can relate to that. I understand what he means by that, but then to sort of use that the critical thinking about where we are as a society to apply that to words you're no longer allowed to say, like retarded, instead of so many, I don't know, it's like, why not apply that to the things that you say about people and how in that reflects the direction that we're sliding in as a society. For example, like immigrants, talking about immigrants in a certain way, or homeless people in a certain way, which he also does in this special. It's like, those are people who are going to be targeted in the near future in America. So it's like that, those jokes, getting on stage and, callously, not necessarily like cleverly and thoughtfully making jokes about people like that, but like callously doing so. I don't know, it just strikes me as that same type of societal rot, of you don't say anything about this, you don't get offended about something because it's not you that they're going after. That's the whole central premise. So, obviously it was just a joke he's making about saying the word retarded. And he's just trying to be a coy dick about that. But I thought it was funny for him to reference that perspective, because things like that are what make me want a little bit more out of these fucking comedians. I hear stuff like that and I'm like, that's the kind of thinking that I want to hear applied at like a better level, a higher level. Like, that's the type of energy that I want, but more gooder.
Yeah, I saw that special. I liked it. Pretty good. Not exactly my thing as far as comedy taste goes, but I was chuckling throughout most of it, and it was very well written. I'll give him that. You can tell he really knows how to write stand-up comedy and come across very casually and not make it feel overwritten. There was a moment where I thought he committed one of my, like, what I would consider a cardinal sin among comedians, where they like lose the thread. They like set up a joke and then start talking about something else and never come back around to that joke. Sometimes that happens, usually among more amateurish comedians, because they actually just lose the thread and forget to come back and get caught up with what they're doing. Other times, and what I thought it was here, was that he just used the setup as a fake setup to talk about other stuff. It was when he was talking about the Down syndrome football player, when he started and then people reacted and he started talking about how they react and he kept going off and off. I was like, oh shit, this was just a setup for a setup. There was no punch to that original. But then he brought it all the way back around and did it in a very good way. So I gotta respect that for sure. And the conclusion about Kanye would have tackled him is a perfect evaluation of Kanye, I think. How he talks about him throughout is pretty funny, and I would say pretty on point in general. But watering down the kind of guy Kanye West is to that moment is perfect as far as I'm concerned. And the fact, too, that he had the balls, being Joe Rogan's friend and being in that scene, to call out Joe Rogan and make fun of him when he was talking about I forget the football player's name, but it was from a couple years ago. The guy had the heart attack on field when he got hit in the chest when they were playing the Bengals, and he was talking about Joe Rogan. He's like, what was he vaccinated? All right, Joe, let him get off the field. That was really funny. I laughed out loud at that, and I really respected that he was willing to do that. And I also really liked his take about if you were to honestly look at things, it's not like 50-50 Democrats and Republicans. It would be more like 6% Democrats, 6% Republican, and 41% doesn't give a shit, which, saying that out loud now, I realize that math doesn't really add up, but it's pretty close. And I'm sure that was part of the joke. I really liked that observation. There were several throughout I did like. And that's one of the things I do like about Ari's comedy, is it falls into that category of where it's not all really jokey. It's kind of like a comedian saying something about stuff and actually having a point. But his point is, I don't really give a fuck. And like you said, I think you described him as both sardonic and apathetic. Those are, the perfect descriptions of him. I mean, it's not exactly revelatory, obviously. Like, he describes himself that way, and that's his whole thing. It's one of the things I do like about him, is that he can come across... He definitely... intentionally comes across as like shocking and saying things that are gonna offend people just for the sake of that sometimes, but it never feels like it comes from like a mean place. Like one thing I definitely noticed about the special is he was punching down a bit in the beginning, especially when he was talking about drug addicts and stuff like that. I think maybe he feels like he gets a little bit of a pass because he's a big druggie, or like fat people making fat jokes or whatever, but I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that in general, but with him, I will give him credit for it. It doesn't seem like it comes from a place of hate, at least. It just comes from a place of apathy and general, malaise and hatred of people or whatever. Maybe not hatred, that's too far. But yeah, just apathy, just not giving a shit and liking to talk shit and kind of piss people off sometimes. And I can get behind that. I think if I had discovered him as he is right now, when I was 20, I would have fucking loved him. And that's not saying that like when I was 20 because I was younger and dumber. Just I was more in the mindset for stuff like that then. I definitely respect his comedy writing and stuff. One thing I didn't really get too into was the whole retard stuff he wanted to go off about. Like, I'm not a big fan of the word. I don't think it's as bad as the N word or the F word like he was trying to say and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm still saying the word, right? But to me, it's more like when, people in, especially like the 90s and early 2000s, used gay as a pejorative. Like, oh, that's gay. Where it's not really a slur, but you're still using it as a negative. I would put it more in that camp than an actual slur. And I don't think we really need to get behind like rallying that we shouldn't have lost that word. That feels like a kind of lame argument to me. It's fine. It's not a big deal. And I don't want to I take extra steps to not come across as too sensitive to that because I am the father of a special needs child. I don't think that's why that stuff rubs me the wrong way, because it doesn't in that way, but it just feels like, who really gives a shit? Why are you holding on to that word? Like, if that bothers people and it's not that big of a deal, we have so many other words we can use, why not? But if you love that word that much and you feel you need to use it, go ahead. It's not a big deal. At the end of the day, it's not a slur. But when you're using it as a pejorative like that, it just makes me feel like you seem kind of dumb and have a limited vocabulary. So if you still need that word, go for it. So I was a little disappointed to see him go that route, but not terribly surprised. And it's not a big deal. It didn't ruin the special for me or anything. I just like, meh, I don't really care for that take, but it is what it is at the end of the day. But overall, I thought the special was all right. I like the Doug stand-up special we talked about recently. I felt like it was a little too long. I see that with a lot of specials these days. I think they can be a lot tighter, but they're still good. And it felt more just like an hour of stand-up than a special. Like, I think he's put out a few specials in the last few years, and I think he's starting to get the Louis C.K. thing, where that, like, Louis was doing that famously, that brand new hour each year and throwing the old stuff out every year. And I think a lot of people, you being one of them, feel like we got diminishing returns on that. I feel like we see that from a lot of comics these days, and I would put this into that camp where maybe he could have taken a little more time, maybe one more year, and gotten this material a little better, or this hour in general a little more solid. But I don't think it was a waste to do. And, you know, what do I know? I'm not a comedian at his level. He's doing really well, and I enjoyed it. So overall, I think it was a pretty good special, and it probably made me like Ari a little more than I have recently.
One thing I noticed is that he says the whole thing about just not watching the news at all, because it's always bad, and just not paying attention to the news. And that's fair. I totally get why somebody would do that, and I definitely believe it might just be a persona thing, but I can totally see Ari Shaffir being the person who just completely does not watch any news and like just knows nothing about what's going on. But I also noticed that a lot of his references and stuff that he was using to jump off of for bits was old, man. He literally brings up a 5-year-old article just to like, and he uses it, I think he kind of like tells a little story about it to bring it to sort of talk about the progression since that moment. I think it was the thing about white privilege. He was talking about how he read an article about white privilege 5 years ago, and I don't know, it's kind of I think his take on white privilege was pretty funny, actually, so I didn't mind that. But that's a really tired place to start a bit, man. And like, I think it's that seemed to me like the kind of thing that he's probably been working on for a while. It started as a bit about an article about white privilege, and then it evolved over the years. So that's why he still uses it. So maybe that's why you felt the diminishing returns thing on this special, because maybe he's been using, this isn't all his like Jew special stuff, which was a whole separate thing, but that sounds crazy to say out of context. But his special that was called Jew, and how all of that material was like exactly the same theme. It was all about the same thing. This might have been some of the other stuff that he's worked up over the years that isn't about that he found a home for in this Netflix special. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think it's the best material. I've never felt like Ari Shaffir really dishes up like the best stuff where I'm like, wow, I've never gotten excited about his material particularly, but I think he's good. And I found the past two specials to be more entertaining than anything else I've seen from him. So I feel like he's coming into his own in terms of the work he's putting out. So I can respect that. But yeah, definitely felt like the references were a little outdated. Like, I respect being unplugged from the news, but definitely not the most finger on the pulse type of special I have seen. Far from that.
But yeah, and I don't know. I don't really respect that take. I don't watch the news. that's such a like cool kid, you know, or like I don't even watch television kind of take these days. Like, but staying uninformed because it's depressing just kind of makes you seem like an asshole. But I get that that's part of its persona. That's why I didn't dig into that part too deep. But that definitely like pulled me out of it a little bit when he was talking about that. I'm like, like, sure, great. What was the line he had? Wait, are you just trying to feel sad? And it's like, yeah, no, unfortunately that is the end result from the news these days. But like, I don't know, like just tapping out completely isn't really a solution either. But I get it, and also I wish I had that kind of ability to just turn that off and not give a shit and not watch the news, because I would feel much better myself. So I mean, more power to him, honestly.